Welcome to the DFO Rundown Podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Very excited to have on the DFO Rundown today. He's a four-time Stanley Cup champion. He played in over 1,080 NHL hockey games, including over 100 in the NHL playoffs. He went on to be an NHL head coach, as well as an NHL general manager, and now he is an NHL analyst. Craig MacTavish joins us. Mac T, how you doing?
I'm good, Greg's. Thank you. What's DFO stand for?
Daily Faceoff.
Daily Faceoff. Okay, I'm on that site lots, but never heard it. DFO.
Yeah, it's probably not the best name if we're being blunt. So we might have to look at rebranding that. But the rundown, that's what it is. We stuck with it, so away we go. Hey,
all right.
I want to get your thoughts, of course, on you played lots, you coached, but in the Battle of Alberta, I want to start there as a player. And you obviously played in the playoffs against the Flames. There was lots of intensity and emotion. The game's very different now, but I was looking at the playoff games, and they did seem, there wasn't as much shenanigans, might not be the word, but guys played really hard and there was huge hits, but there seemed to be a little bit more control of emotions. Is that fair?
Yeah, there's lots at stake, obviously, in the playoffs. You don't want to get loose and take penalties. I mean, that's not a recipe for success. But I remember big hits, especially Jeff Book-a-Boom. I mean, Book would just he took a lot of pride in punishing the Calgary Flames for a decade or so, and but both teams knew what was at stake. Both teams, in my mind and a lot of other people's minds, we were the best two teams in the league back then, and we knew what was at stake. And you had to be disciplined to win.
Was there somebody on the Flames during those years for you that you just despised, that you felt like there was an individual rivalry?
Well, the guy I battled most against, maybe two guys, would be Joel Otto for sure, because we took a lot of faceoffs against one another, and he was a formidable opponent. I mean, he was a hard-nosed guy, and he stretched the boundaries of your courage, that's for sure. And the other guy that I battled against was Gary Roberts at times. So, I mean, those guys were kind of in my weight category back in those days, and you had to punch to your weight category for sure. I didn't get involved in Hunter, and I knew that, and I'd verbally try and abuse him as much as I could. But it was they weren't a lot of fun to play in, but in hindsight, they were the most memorable games that I was a part of.
It's interesting. You're not the first guy who said that from the outside, the fans absolutely loved it. But there was Dave Lumley, I think, once said, he goes like, honestly thought one of us might kill each other. Like, it was so intense at times, and it was just, especially in the regular season, you face each other 8 times, and it was always trying to like, okay, can we send one more extra message? Like, were there times when you were on the bench where it was just like, it wasn't fun, or when you're in the moment it was like, oh, this is great? How was it for you, when you see Hunter and Semenko and then Poplinski, and there's line brawls, back to back, and some games that you literally get the next shift, you're fighting automatically?
Well, it was intense. I mean, it was, you had to be ready to play, because that's really the way you measured your worth to the rest of your teammates and your organization, is how much you'd step up in those big games and those big physical games. I remember there was one game we got beat pretty handily in Calgary, and then we had a back-to-back back in Edmonton. And I mean, the first shift, it was a brawl, and I got ejected from the game. Kevin Lowe got ejected from the game. And so we're 1 minute into the game, and he and I are both in the dressing room. And I remember Kevin saying to me, "Man, were we ever on the same wavelength tonight?" And but you had to. And I'd rather deal with the Calgary Flames on the ice than Glenn Sather in the locker room if you didn't do it.
So, yeah, as a guy who became a coach, Craig, What did you learn from Slats as a coach, and how you dealt with guys in how they showed up at intense moments? What did that allow you as a coach to be better? Like, how do you take that to know that, okay, these are the guys I want on my team when crunch time comes?
Well, winners want accountability, and that's really what I learned from Glenn. And we had multiple superstars, obviously well documented, but everybody was held accountable in different ways. And winners really want that accountability. If somebody's not pulling their weight or doing their job or cutting corners, as a player on a winning team, on a championship caliber team, you want that addressed by your coaching staff. And he had no problem doing that. And he was a great bench coach. Obviously the first two lines were always going to play. Messier and Gretzky's line were always going to play. But there was a lot of internal competition between the third and fourth line, because the fourth line was good. The third line was pretty good. But we knew going into the meat of the game, into the last bit of the third period, or even the third period, that, one line was going to be out of the mix. And so that created internal competition, which I thought was healthy. And as a player, you really want to play when you're on, when you have your legs, when you're playing well. You want that recognition from the coaching staff. You want them to play in those situations. And when, conversely, if you're off and don't have it that night, he recognized that too, and you'd be pasted to the bench.
So, Craig, as players, you must hold each other very accountable at the same time. Did you ever have a situation where somebody had to address a guy that you felt, wasn't holding up his personal end of the bargain? Did Messier or yourself or Gretzky, did those conversations go on?
Kevin was normally the facilitator of all that stuff.
Okay.
And he would go to Mark, and they were, obviously best of friends, as Kevin and Wayne were. But Kevin he would go to Mark if something needed to be addressed, and maybe Mark's voice carried more weight at that time from Mark, but it was more a collective challenging than an individual challenging. I mean, there were times when individuals were challenged. It didn't happen very often, maybe 2 or 3 times in my tenure here, but more a collaborative, collective challenging of the group to, get better, dig in, play tougher, play harder, be more disciplined, whatever the case called for.
Craig, you came into Edmonton in 85, 86, and that's obviously one of the more memorable battles of Alberta, not for the Oilers, with the outcome, of course, of the infamous Steve Smith play. But what did you learn when you came in quickly? Obviously, you'd been in the Eastern Conference. You'd seen the Oilers, of course. I'm sure you're well aware of them. But what surprised you most when you became a teammate of the Oilers in the mid-'80s?
Well, just the inclusiveness of everybody. I mean, everybody was always included on and off the ice. There were no cliques. I mean, when I first got here, I moved in with Kevin Lowe for almost as soon as I got here. It was just everybody would go out as a group. Nobody was excluded. Sure, there were guys that didn't go, but they were always welcome to go. And they were really great people. I came from Boston, and it was a very close-knit group too as well. But winning happens for a reason, and especially when it's repeatable. I mean, in hindsight, that was a pretty dedicated, close group of players that went through that era. And the great thing about playing on good teams is you can get rid of guys that don't fit when you're on a good team. If guys come in and they just don't fit for whatever reason, I mean, they would be gone in a hurry.
Yeah. And so you could tell that right away. 'Cause like, how long would it take to know if the guy was, and if they didn't fit in, what was it that didn't fit?
Well, their commitment mostly. I mean, there was a lot of characters. Everybody's got their own personality, but when the game's on the line and you need that player the most, you have to do things, and your behavior has to suit the situation that's best for the team. And those things are painfully obvious when when your individual objectives supersede the objectives of the group. And that can't happen. And any type of selfishness or poutiness in crucial situations, that you'd be gone pretty quick.
Craig, before we move into your coaching, of course, you won the 3 Stanley Cups with the Oilers. You were part of the last Battle of Alberta in 1991. There was the Theo Fleury slide in Game 6, and then the Esa Tikkanen overtime winner in Game 7. Can you describe, and you'd won Stanley Cup, so you guys had probably learned how everybody always said, don't get too high, don't get too low. I know it's a cliche, but I'm sure there's definitely some truth to it. But how did you react to after tough losses in the playoffs? How long did it take you to get over it? And did you learn to let it go quicker?
Well, I think that's the responsibility of the coaching staff. They can let that loss linger. I mean, we seldom did that. Glenn would generally always speak at the end of the game. And I like that personally as a player, because I wanted to hear how he analyzed the game. And then you address the issues, you talk about the shortcomings after a loss like that, and then you move on. Today's coach, they rarely address the team after the game, I find. But as a player, I used to, the rare time Glenn didn't come in, we'd always be waiting in there for him to come in and put a wrap on the game. And then we'd come in the next morning, and then we'd strategize on what we could do better. This is in the playoffs. We didn't do a lot of video in the regular season. But John Muckler was unbelievable at that time of breaking down video, and he had total credibility from the team to input strategical changes. And I mean, he had total buy-in from the leadership. We knew how bright John was tactically, and that was just an unbelievable coaching staff. John did the tactical changes and adjustments. Ted Green was an unbelievable person, great liaison between the players and the coaching staff. A lot of fun. And Glenn was in charge of accountability and bench management, and he did a fantastic job of that, obviously.
Now, why do you think today's coaches don't address the teams right after the game? Is there a reason why that's changed?
I think a lot of them are afraid of the immediacy of the emotion of a loss, and you have to be fearful of doing more damage than good.
Okay.
I think a lot of them are like that. And they want to check the video out, and the emotion I mean, for anybody that's ever been in a coach's room after a loss, it's a pretty toxic area. And I mean, I don't think it's a productive routine for coaches, and everybody comes in and they've got their idea and they pick the players apart, and so-and-so's no good, and what's going on with him. And, then you sleep on it and you come in with a much different perspective the next day. But when I first went into the coach's room, I couldn't believe how toxic it was. And, I'm going, man, I can't believe the things I'm sure Glenn and Muck and Ted Green said about me over the years, because it can get pretty pretty toxic in there.
So you, of course, you finished your career. You won a Stanley Cup in New York as well, and then you finish out with Philly and St. Louis, and then you basically went right from the Blues the next year as an assistant coach to the New York Rangers. Were you thinking coach late in your career, Craig? Were you a guy taking notes, and had you had those conversations with Sather before he hired you?
Well, last couple contracts I had, I always had a coaching component to my contract. So I had, if I signed another year, I had 2 years to start coaching, to be an assistant coach with Edmonton. And, so I was very much taking notes, drills, tactics that worked for me. I built a binder. I called it the Hockey Bible, and I still have it and still rely on it. When I was part of the Edmonton Oil or the New York Rangers in '94, and won the Cup in '94, I was actually offered the coaching job for the Edmonton Oilers after that season from Peter Pocklington and Glenn. And I chose to continue to play, but I always knew that I was going to get into coaching. I just never knew at that point how difficult coaching was.
So take me through. You were an assistant coach for 3 years, 2 with the Rangers, 1 with the Oilers, and you became the head coach in 2000. What was the most difficult, unexpected part of coaching for you?
Well, I mean, just the difference in the way you view the game from sitting on the bench to standing behind it. It's about 2 feet in physical distance, but it's a lifetime of change. And I couldn't believe when I first stood behind the bench in New York in a preseason game, how fast everything was happening. And I kept thinking, like, when I was sitting there, it wasn't happening this fast. But I mean, when you stand behind there, just how fast the game is. I mean, it slows down after a couple of games behind there, but I really was struck by, I was struck by how fast it was, and I was struck by the puck in the first game I was behind the bench. I was going like, I can't even keep an eye on the puck. I got to get my changes out there, and there's a lot going on, and it's unfamiliar territory, and sure enough, I get whacked by a puck coming into the bench. And I can assure you there's not a lot of empathy from the players when the coach gets hit in the head with a puck. but yeah, things, and meetings, conducting meetings, video meetings, getting comfortable doing that takes time. And, I was so fortunate that I shared a very small office in New York with Bill Morris. And Billy.
Yeah.
And Billy has broke in more coaches than anybody, myself, Kelly Buchberger, Mark Lamb, Craig Simpson, everybody. It doesn't matter. They all gravitate to Billy because he's such a wonderful teacher and such a fantastic coach that I was really fortunate to share an office with him. We had a lot of laughs. I learned a lot, and it was a real blessing for me to be able to do that and have that education for a guy that has accomplished so much.
Now, Craig, I want to go, a little bit different situation when you coached, of course, because in the early 2000s, the Oilers, the back before the salary cap, you're pushing a rock uphill with a $40 million payroll, and the top teams had an $80 million payroll, and you kept trying to beat Dallas and get over that hump. When you see the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that's been very good in the regular season, but they haven't been able to get past the first round, and really, they haven't been able to get past Game 7 or elimination games in the first round. As a coach, how would you approach that? What do you think has to change for that team? How much of that is mental, and how can a coach help get over that hurdle?
Oh, I don't think it's mental at all with Toronto. I think it's situational, totally. Okay. Last year, when they played Montreal, it was such a wild series that really nothing went wrong for Toronto through the first 4 or 5 games. And even the loss they had in game 6, they totally dominated the game. So it was situational. So there wasn't a situation that occurred in that series against Montreal that the coaching staff would have said, okay, we got to make adjustments, because everything was really working. It was a weird series till it didn't work in game 7. I mean, game 7 would have been the series where the game where you made adjustments, because everything other than that, you had to be pretty pleased on how it was going from a Toronto standpoint. So that was a really weird series, and I watched that series pretty hard. Now, Tampa, I mean, they're 2-time Stanley Cup champions. I mean, you have an unbelievable year. You win a lot of games for the right to play the team that's won 2 Stanley Cups in a row and is just loaded up at the trade deadline, and arguably the best goalie in the league. And Toronto, I thought, played great. I mean, they stayed with them right blow for blow with the best team in the game. And so, I mean, I feel I'm empathetic. I used to be a Toronto hater for a lot of years, but I've gotten over that. I actually cheer for Toronto now at times, and was cheering for them in the playoffs because I've got empathy for their organization. I think they've done a lot of things right, and they did a great job last year adding depth players to their organization. Bunting, Camp, Cache. I mean, those were great ads. So they've done a lot of great things. I feel empathetic to them because the media and the fan base and those, I mean, the question that Steve Simmons asked, the
head coach in Toronto?
Yeah.
Sheldon Keefe?
Yeah, Sheldon Keefe. The question he asked Sheldon Keefe, how could you start your worst defenseman in the first shift of the game? I mean, to me, it's amazing that the media rallies behind that type of question. I mean, and they support Steve Simmons' right to ask that type of question. But to me, it's totally disrespectful of the game, the player, the people. I mean, it's just wrong, and you have to deal with that stuff there as a coach. And I'm empathetic for Brendan Shanahan, Kyle Dubas, Sheldon Keefe, because I think they do a good job under extreme pressure-filled situations. The problem with coaching has always been the same thing. It's so friggin' easy to criticize and so friggin' difficult to do. And you take everything that a coach does well for granted, and you poke away at any shortcomings, perceived shortcomings. And I mean, it's tough. Everybody's got an opinion. It's not necessarily an educated opinion, but everybody has an opinion.
Now, Craig, you coached in tough games, and the Battle of Alberta game 1, something we've never seen actually in the Battle of Alberta. 15 combined goals. The previous most was 12 back in 1983, and it was not a great game by any of the goaltenders on the ice. I thought the Oilers' defensive zone play obviously was not close to up to par, but in the 2006 Stanley Cup Finals, you lost a heartbreaking game 1, and then you kind of got spanked in game 2. So you have tough games. As a coach, like, how do you bounce back? How quickly do you look at that game? You're disappointed, but then be like, I don't have time to be disappointed. So how do you control your emotions as a coach after a frustrating loss like that?
Well, everybody's looking at the coach to provide the insight and the guidance to change it. And you have to come up with a plan. The plan has to have credibility. It's got to be backed up by video at times on things that you need to do. And in a leadership position, you have to deliver a strategic message to the team after a loss. You just have to. It's part of the job. And so everybody can get their teeth into it. Okay, that's what we're going to do. That's what we have to change. This will change the result, and you sell it to your group however you have to, whether you bring in the leaders and you get everybody on the same page. And that's part of being the leadership part of being the coach. And that's I enjoyed that part of it, is tactical changes and so forth that the players can get their teeth into, execute, and then turn the results around.
I'm sure you've coached games where you can tell right away, man, the guys don't have it here tonight. And you keep waiting for it to come. And like the orders in game one, right from the get-go, they weren't crisp. They were not great in the defensive zone. That's obvious. But they managed somehow to tie that game at 6, despite being vastly outplayed. And now all of a sudden it's a new game, yet the same problems emerged after. Can you tell as a coach some games that it's just, well, we don't have it? And I know obviously you keep fighting to try to get it, but take us through the mind and the emotion of a head coach in a game where the team just isn't playing up to their capabilities, because they went from 2 great defensive games to looking like they didn't know how to play defense.
Yeah, that was mind-blowingly bad to start that game, obviously. I think in the first 5 minutes, for sure the first 4 minutes, the only completed pass I saw was from Mike Smith.
Yeah.
Like, they did not complete one pass. And in 4 minutes of hockey, I don't think there was not one clean movement of the puck. On the penalty kill, I think Archibald turned back in the offensive zone about 4.5 minutes in and fired a pass back that went tape to tape to, it might have been Duncan Keith at the time. But it was bizarre. And Calgary had their foot on the throttle the whole game. When they got disinterested, the Oilers got back in the game. And then they got interested again and slapped them around. And it was, you talked about the defensive zone coverage. When you're going soft to the outside in the defensive zone with 2 guys, you're screwed. There's all kinds of holes in much more dangerous areas than the ones you're tippy-toeing into. And they lacked assertiveness in the defensive zone. The gap was bad. The puck movement was atrocious. And you get the type of result that we saw in game one. As a coach, I would have rather just continued to get blown out if I was Jay Woodcroft, because I don't want anybody thinking we were close to winning that game. And there's got to be, Jay will be all over this today. And there's lots of visual evidence of things that they did wrong. But it's 2 games in a row in Calgary, right? 9 goals each game. That's a trend. And yeah. Can we stop them? That's the question I have going into game 2.
One last one about the NHL playoffs, Greg. I want to get your thoughts. The Colorado Avalanche have just looked dominant so far. They're 5-0. They controlled Nashville. They controlled St. Louis. They're such a well-balanced team. They got great speed. They got elite offensive talent. Then you throw in Cale Makar, who can attack you from anywhere. How would you, as a coach, what would you try to game plan to slow down the Avs?
Well, I would have as many guys above the puck as possible. If you can't get to the forecheck, you have to have 5 guys above that puck. And otherwise, there's going to be huge gaps, huge seams for the puck to be moved through, for guys to skate through. And they're going to kill you on the rush with their speed. And you've got to play more of a defensive tactical game I mean, you want to get to the forecheck when you can, because that's where you got to spend a lot of your time is in their zone. But if you can't get there, you need guys above the puck. You can't have 3 forwards chasing the play back through the neutral zone and expect to win.
Craig, we always like to wrap up with rapid fire. The only rule is you have to answer the question. Okay, we'll start with some fun and easy ones. Yeah, you have to. Yeah. So we always try to have a few ones where make you think. So
what are the consequences if you don't answer the question?
Well, we send actually Frank Saravalli comes to your house. So and he's a Philly guy, so you want to be leery of that. Be leery of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Frank's a scary guy.
We'll start with an easy one, Craig. Of all the teammates you played with, who do you think would have been the best coach who didn't coach?
Messier.
Did you ever ask him why he didn't coach?
He had opportunity to coach. I think it just didn't fit him at the time. And I always thought he would have been an excellent coach, and I still do.
Were you ever on the receiving end of one of Messier's infamous conversations with a teammate to ensure they were playing better?
No. Folklore. It didn't happen often.
Okay.
I mean, Mark's leadership was more a respect thing than a threatening thing. I mean, everybody loved Mark because he had such a great time. He was a lot of fun. He knew he had the great balance of when to crank it up and when to have some fun. People wanted to please Mark, and I think that was his leadership, I think.
What was so uncomfortable for you about wearing a helmet?
Just the heat. I mean, I remember the one time I put the helmet on the first game of the regular season, and I was throwing up behind the bench. Just you release a lot of heat through your head, and if you're not used to having that helmet on, it's a problem.
Did you find when you were, near the end and you were the only guy without a helmet, were other players respectful of that?
I think so. I mean, I think so. No, I didn't mind whacking a guy over the head with my stick if he had a helmet on, but I'd be, I don't think I'd do that with a guy that didn't wear a helmet.
Which player got under your skin the most during your career, and why?
I mean, I didn't love Claude Lemieux. I don't think anybody did back in those days. He was a pain. Tony Granato, he and I went at it a lot. Joel Otto, as I mentioned earlier, those guys. Tim Waters, I hated. Played for LA, but those guys.
When you got into coaching, Craig, which coach did you feel like the in-game adjustments was the best challenge for you early in your career?
Coaching against?
Yeah.
I always had a lot of respect for Dave Tippett when he coached for Dallas. He was point, counterpoint. I mean, it was always a tactical battle against Dave. I mean, it seemed like Hitch, when he was in Dallas, we were making the adjustments. He wasn't, because he didn't need to. Yeah.
Fair enough. How disappointing was it as the head coach to go from the Stanley Cup final to then you lose your all-star defenseman? Like, did you really have to be a purveyor of positivity to start the 06-07 season, maybe unlike any other season of your career as a coach?
Well, the one thought I have now is we should have tried to keep that team together somehow. And I don't know whether we could have, but we were so close that we lost quite a few guys off that team at the end of the year. I don't think we could have been able to keep it together, but we should have. We could have really tried to propose it. I mean, Kevin was dealing with Chris Pronger. It didn't seem like there was a lot of leeway for him to come back at that time. So that hurt. But some of the other guys we should have tried to retain.
You mentioned earlier that you learned a lot. You were surprised about coaching, how difficult it was. What about being a GM? What was your eye-opening moment as a GM? What caught you off guard?
Oh, just the meetings with, I mean, the people walking through your door with the latest, greatest idea that you have to have, and you're falling behind the rest of the league because they have this, whether it's something to do with conditioning, nutrition, analytics, another way to measure and do something that is going to turn your franchise around, and just how long those meetings were. And I always would, okay, let's draw the link from this, whatever you're selling, to performance. How is this going to functionally make us perform better as a team? And that's when it kind of got quiet in those meetings. And then at the start, I tried to do the right thing and, help people and negotiate their contracts. And that was just a total waste of time, because everybody's negotiating their contract. Like, it's the last contract in the world. And, I tried to be accommodating at the start, and then I realized that, it's just going to be a never-ending push till I say that's it. And so I came to that's it pretty quickly.
Okay. Favorite golf course you've played?
Pebble Beach, for sure. I never could answer that question quickly till I played Pebble.
Who would be your ultimate, if you're in the foursome, who's the other three that you would want to golf with?
Well, I've already played with them. I played in my ultimate foursome.
Who's that?
Wayne Gretzky, Kevin Lowe, and Tiger Woods.
Oh, how was Tiger?
He was great. Yeah, it was great. We played at Rio Seco in Vegas, and played, this was before Tiger had his fall from grace. He was working with Butch Harmon there, and we played at Rio Seco. And so we all get up on the first tee. I'm riding with Kevin, Gretz is riding with Tiger. And so Kevin, who can hit the ball a long way, is a lefty, and he crushed his on the first tee. And Tiger hit his, and Kevin gets it. Kevin and I get in the golf cart. Kevin says, I think I hit it by Tiger, he calls him. I think I hit it by Tiger. Well, Tiger was about 30 yards by him on the fairway, but he was serious. He thought he hit it by Tiger.
What impressed you most about being up close and watching Woods when you played golf with him?
How well he could see the ball. Like, it was amazing how that guy could hit it 350 yards and see it approach the pin. Like, I just couldn't believe the eyesight on the guy. It was incredible.
Did he give you any golf tips?
No, but one hole I made a bogey and he made a double bogey, and he was putting his tee on the tee box. I said, I think I'm up, Tiger.
Did he laugh?
Yeah, he laughed. Yeah. He took his tee out and said, have at it. And then I pulled it in the ditch. Yeah.
Well, Craig, we really appreciate your time today. Now, would you? We've got a lot of people that ask me when they told me you're coming on. You're an analyst now on Sportsnet. Would you have any interest? Would you like to get into coaching again?
Yeah, given the right opportunity, I would. I enjoy it. I don't know in what capacity, but I would enjoy getting back into it in the right situation.
And it wouldn't have to be as a head coach; it'd be assistant coach too.
Yeah,
or only head coach.
Yeah, I at this point, it's probably more fun being an assistant coach than a head coach, especially in this crazy market dealing with you guys.
Well, Craig, as always, we appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs.